Oh, gee, I never had our announcement up tonight. Okay, there it is. Empowering
Okay.
democracy.
Let's see.
Okay, I'll take it away right away.
Okay.
Okay, this is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. Tonight I'm joined by my good friend, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends, Dee Pierce. Hello,
Happy to be
Dee.
here.
How are you doing?
I'm doing okay, and I'm happy to be here.
Good. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here myself as well. Okay, our topics for tonight are more on the 12-day war from Alastair Crook. Uh, Also, we have a topic on the damage the Israelis have suffered, during the 12 days, an actual detailing of the damage, which sounds like it would be very important because the mainstream is downplaying the damage that's been suffered by Israel, but not the damage the Iranians, okay, have suffered. So we discussed that to provide some balance. Then we talk about the red flag of 61%. In other words, the enrichment, uh, the Iranians, I shouldn't say the Uranians, the Iranians have been striving for is 61%. But why 61%? I mean, what they need for medical purposes is 20%. Uh, why go to 61%? Some people have been saying, well, then they have something, to negotiate. Uh, uh, that's one reaction to it. And I've kind of accepted that. But it's also true. Some people, like Scott Ritter, have been saying that's like waving the red flag in front of the bull, the bull being the United States. So, okay. Anyway, we go over a piece, from Alexander Mercouris that gives a pretty good explanation of why they enriched to 61% rather than going the whole way towards a bomb. Okay, so there's good explanation in there. We'll discuss that. Okay, and then a topic that seems off center at present, but is going on, in the background and is important. Technical progress, okay, in China, and specifically the development of an AI tech stack by the very large and important Chinese company known um, um, as um, 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 Huawei. So we'll talk about that, the AI tech stack, and we'll explain what that is. And then finally, we're going to end with a discussion of truth and why it's best to tell the truth when you're involved, okay, in international politics. Why it's not good to lie all the time, which is mostly what the United States does. So certainly it's what the Israelis do, and some of our other, really favorite actors. So we'll begin in the usual way, though. Specifically, we'll say hello to a few people, and then we will share for a minute. Steve Wolfbrand says hello, everybody. Steve is on YouTube, and he's also on Facebook, and he said hello on Facebook too. Okay, Evelina is on Facebook and says hi all and shared. Well, thank you both. Thank you both for coming. We have a number of other people, of course, but we can't see them. They're probably joining us from Twitter, which is probably why we cannot see them. So let's begin by sharing this video on Facebook, and hopefully getting more people to come as a result. Yeah, there we go. We have a decent number of people who seem already to have joined us from Facebook. That's nice. That is always nice. I have a picture of Sherry Wise on my Facebook. She looks extremely young in this picture. Anyway, let's get back to the main part of the stream.
About a principle in this respect. So I think that is an important.
Okay, what we're going to do now is finish the video that we were analyzing on Thursday. The excellent piece by Nima Halkershid, who was interviewing the former diplomat and also intelligence official for the UK, whose name, is Alastair Crook. We went through roughly the first 47 minutes of that video on Thursday, but there was a lot more to go and a lot more to say, so I wanted to complete it here. So we begin with that. I'm sharing that now.
I think Iran has demonstrated very clearly the vulnerability of Israel, and it's also, if you like, punctured the myth of Israeli technical material superiority, exceptionalism. I don't know what impact that will have within the region. I feel it will have an important impact, but I think it's too soon to really judge that and guess how that is going to turn out. With the United States, it's really more complicated. I think because, as you've probably seen, for the United States, you have there's been a dissonance within the political system. The MAGA populists have been saying quite loudly and clearly, this goes against what we stood for. We voted for Trump, no more wars, no more Middle East wars, particularly. And we were on the brink of it. And Iran was firing missiles into Udeid military base in Qatar, and it could have taken off, and we would be in a major war, and that wasn't what we voted. And there's been strong language coming out of people like Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, and others saying, you're getting. We're moving into the neocon camp with this sort of actions.
It's really not too surprising we're moving into the neocon camp, since Trump basically surrounded himself with neocons on foreign policy. So that was interesting. I think there should have been an uprising in the Republican base in January and February and March, when he surrounded himself with all these people, it seemed like the only one who wasn't a neocon uh, was Tulsi Gabbard, but everyone else certainly seemed very neoconish to me. But be that as it may.
More than that, they are saying, and this is very important, they're saying, we are going to war not because it's in American interest, but it is in the interest of another state that is not American. Why would we do this when it was supposed to be America first? So that's
good question.
That's having a big impact, I think, on the United States. And I think even if Trump is sort of drifting off into rather bizarre statements and things, this aspect of what's happening within, because this is so important, this is defining moment, because many of the voters that supported Trump at the last election came from the Democratic Party and came to him. There were two reasons. One was the immigration, but the other reason was no forever wars.
Sorry. I gotta get.
Should these glasses be illegal in the U.S.? Don't risk straining your eyes or wasting money.
And at the midterms, they could lose those people. They could go back to the Democrats. And that would mean that the MAGA would lose power for however many years.
Not sure what happened to my picture here. I seem to have inadvertently scrolled it. So let me see if I can fix it back up. Should be able.
And I just don't.
Okay, bear with me while I try to figure out what has happened here.
I don't understand why the White House engages in these sort of exaggerated claims and oh, it was perfect, wonderful, we've a complete victory. And so I mean, why not be a little bit more realistic, speaking to your own people. You need to bring your people along, and it's best if you do it and not let them find out that they've been deceived, because that is bad politics, basically. So that's where I think we are sort of globally. Where will America go now? Will it try and take further action against Russia? I think the last thing I would say is, the attack in Iran on the 13th of June was a wake-up call to Russia, China, and many other states. It's a pattern that they saw only weeks earlier in the spider's web attack on their strategic bomber bases, of the insertions of, if you like, cells with trucks and containers with the roof that would open, and drones would be remotely launched that would attack their strategic bombers. I mean,
yeah, the reason why this would be a wake-up call for Russia and China is military operations were getting implemented in the Trump administration that were designed and planned for during the Biden administration. So they seem to be moving forward with a momentum that wasn't coming from Trump himself. But the first one, the attack on the strategic bombers, in Russia, That was something that was planned in the Biden administration, but on the other hand, it doesn't seem like something that the Biden administration would necessarily actually do. Okay, and the same thing was true of the attack on um, the actual attack on Iran was also something planned a lot earlier, but somehow the neocons got Trump to do it. So
Hugely dangerous. The fact that it didn't succeed much in 3 of the air bases, it didn't work. But the fact that it was tried is a wake-up call, of course, to Russia to say, well, what if it does work? What's going on? What's behind it? What is America and the West planning? Decapitation exercises, other places, even in Russia, China, or somewhere else, the same formula? Is it now the sort of Five Eyes modus operandi for the future, this decapitation, assassination, sabotage, attacks by insurgents? Is this the new future?
what he's raising here and the question he's asking is this the new foreign policy of the United States? Specifically, talk to people on the one hand, get them into a negotiation of some sort, and then run an outrageous intelligence operation against them in order to weaken the regimes in Russia and China, and other BRICS nations. It's a very valid question, okay, and a very important one. Is this a new pattern of U.S. foreign policy? That's a big question.
So, it's brought, I think, a great deal of thinking because, Russia is configured for conventional war, basically. The old type of war, forces and military attacks, not for this terrorist war that seems to be being promoted as the next generation of Western warfare.
Yes, he's thinking here, of course, of the first day of, the attack on Iran. That involved a lot of operations by people who had been planted inside of Iran and who had been there for a very long time and who were waiting to be activated, at a critical moment. Okay, in other words, that part of it wasn't strictly speaking an Air Force operation. Okay, instead, it was a Mossad operation. It was an intelligence operation, not simply Mossad, but also CIA and maybe MI6 too. So, that was true of the attack on the bombers in Russia.
In order to preserve its hegemony.
There's a hidden muscle that can make changing chords on guitar as easy as pushing a button. And it's not a muscle in.
You mentioned the main goal to be a regime change in Iran, and I remember those days in the aftermath of war between Iran and Iraq. The level of unity reminds me the level of what's going on within the society in Iran is something similar to those days. They were totally unified against the enemy. They wanted to defeat the enemy. And as you've mentioned, it's not just a problem that people are facing in every day and in their lives in Iran, but people understand that you're not happy with some sort of domestic policies, you criticize it. It doesn't mean that you want to change the government, you want to change everything. You want to reform it, you want to make it better. In each and every country, we see this. But to be so much naive to go after a plan to do regime change in Iran is somehow beyond me. I cannot believe that the United States would decide, would would depend on these sort of rhetorics coming out of the Netanyahu administration, Israelis at the Israeli lobby in the United States. But you've mentioned it was a wake-up call for Russia and China. Is that going to work for those people in Iran who were trying to do everything, to sacrifice everything in order to negotiate with Americans? We've learned that Russian president in St. Petersburg International Economic Forum said that Iranian didn't ask. We wanted to have a better military relationship with Iranians, but they wanted to negotiate with America, and that's why maybe they didn't decide to do that. And here is what he said: the Iranian didn't ask for help. They want they want to fight. During the war, he was asked if Russia would help Iran. He said they want to fight alone. They are proud. They want to be self-sufficient. But we will see if they will need help. For now, they don't they don't want it for now. But is that going to change in the mind of the decision makers in Iran?
Okay, so today I learned that in the whole of Iran, at the time of the attack, there was only one S-400 system that was resident in Iran, okay, at the time. So I thought that the air defense system Iran had was pretty strong, because when the Israelis attacked on October 26th, they never got inside the airspace of Iran. They detected a defense system they had never seen before. Well, maybe it was that one S-400, and they became afraid and they turned around. But I expected that there were a lot of S-400s there. As we learned, as the attack, this latest attack actually proceeded, it became clear that the Iranians were lacking protection from the Russian S-400 and S-500 systems. Instead, the Iranians had S-300 systems, which they upgraded themselves, even to the point where they claimed to have something that was the equivalent of an S-500 system. Well, we saw that the air defense of the Iranians in the war, after the first 8 hours of the first day, was pretty good. But as the days wore on, it became very porous. So the Iranians were subject to attacks by the Israeli air forces more and more, just as the Israelis, were subject to missile and drone attacks, that were beating the Iron Dome and the Arrow system and David's sling and the Aegis systems and all the various layered air defense systems the Israelis had. The hypersonic missiles were getting through, okay, and were beating them. So both parties lay open to air attacks from the opposing party. It was looking as though the Iranians were gaining an advantage because what they were doing was firing more and more advanced missiles, okay, as the war got on. And those missiles were carrying payloads that were much heavier than what they started out with. It appeared that the strategy of the Iranians was to use their older missiles in order to exhaust the air defense system, okay, of the Israelis. And then when the Israelis began to run out of the interceptor missiles, it was then, the Iranians brought forth um, um, their most advanced hypersonic missiles for use. And those were immensely successful, as we shall soon see, in destroying important targets inside of Israel.
Are they going to change their attitude?
It's actually, you haven't mentioned it, but it was the same with China. China was ready to help, and actually, I think possibly did help. There's been evidence of a number of large cargo aircraft arriving in Tehran. But the Chinese made the same complaint, and they said, we were ready to help. We offered help, and it was turned down because the government representatives wanted to shift to India.
The number one food for regular BMs, huh? Okay, let's see.
Fastest way to clear out stuck poop is by
And China and India are not on good terms, so the Chinese dropped it. I mean, I would say, and I'm speaking from a long distance away, but I would guess that this will be seen as a huge strategic mistake on the part of those in the government who both turned down the offer of an agreement. I understand that the relationship between Iran and Russia has not always been that easy, but nonetheless, to deprive your country of air defenses, and which China and Russia will be ready to provide, I think will be seen as a mistake. I think.
Yes, I have to agree with that. I see it as a mistake now, okay, a horrible mistake, okay, and a necessary mistake. If the air defenses, had been there, even if they were confused by the early stages of the cyber warfare and the intelligence operations of the Israelis, if they had come online in 8 hours or so, then you would have increasingly had a situation in the other 11 days of the war where the Israeli planes weren't able to get through to Iran, while hypersonic missiles were increasingly getting through the Israeli air defense systems. And probably the war would have been over by the end of the 12 days if they had had the air defense systems there. So I agree that was a terribly stupid thing on the part of the Iranians to have done.
Yes, if providing they approach it in the right way. I don't know. Probably yes. I see even this morning that the Iranian president has announced that he wants to reestablish negotiations with the United States to normalize the misunderstandings between the US and Iran. Fine.
Okay, that's crazy to me. That's just crazy to me. They wouldn't want to reestablish, talks with the United States. I don't think it's actually so clear, that they do want to. Okay, inside of Iran, there are these factions. The moderate factions, so-called moderate factions or liberal factions, are different from the IRGC and the old line guys. Okay, and the split is appreciable. Okay, and Iran is not really a dictatorship. Supreme leader, is a supreme leader, but that doesn't really mean he's a dictator. He makes final decisions, but a lot goes on in that country that where they're not up to making a final decision about anything. And so things are going, in many directions at once. That's a characteristic of their internal political system, as we'll see later as we move through the show.
If there's advantage in doing that, but as long as the negotiators understand the United States has no real interest in coming to a deal with Iran. They want Iran defeated. I mean, Witkoff said it pretty clearly during an interview with Tucker Carlson. He said, look, he was talking about the new Middle East, and he said, well, Lebanon, I'm sure sooner or later it will normalize with Israel. Syria, well, look, the leader, that's problematic, but, I even believe that he could come into the Abraham Accord. The only problem is Iran. Then is support for all these terrorist organizations. And we get rid.
Yeah, which, by the way, that's a silly idea. There are a lot of different problems. The only one is, is not.
Of that.
Wait until some of the monarchies are overthrown, which I don't think they're going to be there forever.
I mean, it's epic. And we would have the whole Middle East normalized with Israel and the United States. And he called it that. He said it would be epic.
Did you know you can decalcify your pineal gland using only your left hand? Scientists at Stanford Research Institute have...
And so I think that, that is the... I'm sure he was reflecting Trump's, he's a close friend, thinking on the thing too. The problem isn't just the nuclear thing, because they don't believe it can be resolved satisfactorily without regime change, and secondly, it's also it's about the revolution, about the, if you like, the Shi'i steadfastness and ability to endure suffering and pain in pursuit of a principle and of justice. And the West cannot comprehend suffering or the willingness to experience suffering for an end. So for them, it's just a closed book. They can't understand it. So they think, if you will. But look, after what's happened and after what the Supreme Leader said in that address to the people, I mean, and Witkoff, when he said, well, we're looking to sort of have some negotiations with Iran, just, I think, yesterday or something. I mean, said, of course, there can be no enrichment. So what's the point? There can be no enrichment, he said. And I suppose, there will be efforts to persuade him to have limited enrichment, to have a consortium. But, I've been following this for 20 years now. Well, 2015, not quite. But I mean, I've been following this now. We've been all through this, shipping out enriched uranium to another country, to Russia. The idea of someone else providing the electoral basis. It doesn't seem that the world has got it. Russia's already done that. There is a reactor that is built by Russia near Bushehr, and they're building 2 more to provide a power for industry. So what's new? What are they going to change? The only message is, no enrichment, and we must dismantle, as Witkoff said, we will go in and we will dismantle what we see. If there are laboratories, we will blow up the laboratories. We'll blow up. I think it was Trump said that, actually, not Witkoff. They said we will go up and we will, what we can't take, we will blow up, and the laboratories will blow up. But it's difficult then. What are they going to do? Kill the scientists? Or are they going to blow them up too, just to make sure it's forever? Anyway, maybe Iran will go down the road of talking. There's a long history in Russia and Iran of both fighting and talking at the same time. So maybe that will be the case. But I think they will have to be very careful about the mood of the people. Because I think, the mood of the people has been, the Iranian people has been, really activated, been energized by what's happening. And I'm not sure how they'll react to the, to the idea of negotiating with the Europeans after they saw the Europeans, how they performed. I mean, promoting talks on the eve of this sneak attack, of which they were clearly well aware in advance that was being launched on Iran. I don't know, you're probably a better judge, or you are a much better judge than I am, about what will be the sort of reaction of the people. But I think you would need to take, there must be some thought and consideration being given to that, even now, I imagine, in Iran.
When we look at the bigger picture of what's going on between the West and Iran and Russia and China on the other hand, do you feel that, as you've mentioned, Iran and Russia are trying to negotiate, to talk with the United States at least? They're trying to continue the talks. But Donald Trump came to power promising to the base, to those people who voted for him, to put an end to the conflict in Ukraine. He didn't deliver on it. And we have the conflict between Iran and Israel. Nobody knows if it's going to continue. They're going to continue this fight, or we're going to have at the end a ceasefire or a permanent ceasefire between the two parties. Do you see any sort of sign that Donald Trump could achieve some sort of settlement in both in Ukraine and in the Middle East?
No, I just see none. And incidentally, because we focused on, what happened on June the 13th and the deception.
Anyone taking gabapentin or pregabalin for over 30 days needs to see this. Did you know that
But what happened with those Istanbul talks, the attack on the strategic nuclear triad of Russia, took place on the day before. Of course, the West knew about it, and America knew about it. So, every time we're told that there's going to be, a strategic talk, it was actually the same with Hezbollah. Hassan Nasrallah said Hassan thought he was going to discuss a ceasefire when he was lured into that meeting, in which the leadership of Hezbollah were killed. Always, the same thing. Every time there's in this recent period, every time we talk about a ceasefire, and anyway, when we talk about a ceasefire, what are you going to negotiate? Is there a basis for negotiation between Iran and the United States on that? Otherwise, if you go into those talks, you're going into what I call an attritional cage, whereby, we know what a ceasefire means to Israel and America because we see it in Lebanon. It means that Hezbollah is expected to observe a ceasefire, and Israel reserves the right to attack Hezbollah when and where they choose of their own volition. That's a sort of a very unbalanced ceasefire, in my view. And I imagine, and Israel has already said that about Iran. If there's a ceasefire, then if a centrifuge moves, if a part of the enrichment continues, we will strike. So it's a strange sort of ceasefire. Again, no rules, no framework, just, one side determines for itself that it has a freedom of action, but the other side is not going to have freedom of action.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Alastair, for being with us today. Great.
Okay, so that's it. I do want to note those final points. From Alastair's point of view, there is no possibility of agreement here. In other words, the United States and Israel will not come to agreement. I'm not going to come, but to agree with Iran on some kind of peace. What will happen, is warfare. What's been happening so far in the so-called continuation of the ceasefire. Has been a series of incidents with the Israelis breaking the ceasefire and the Iranians retaliating very hard, not acting as they were expected to act, simply absorb the violations by the Israelis. No, they are hitting back very, very hard. And they're increasing the damage done to the Israelis over this period of time. Now, so far, the United States has not been involved in the hitting back. But that doesn't mean we will continue not to be involved. That's going to be up to a decision on the part of Donald Trump. So let's look at some comments here. Steve Gonzo says, freaking fireworks have already started here. You mean the July 4th fireworks have already started? Steve Wolfman says, Steve not here, surprisingly. Steve Gonzo says, hey, Steve Wolfman. Steve Gonzo says, Iran has thousands of nuclear scientists. Their little show of force did little to diminish capabilities. That's extremely true. Extremely true. Definitely true. Evelina says, isn't the enrichment deal off the table altogether now that Iran is hip to grocery? Yes, from the standpoint of the Iranians, it seems like it definitely, is off the table. I think perhaps talking between Iran and the Trump administration is off the table. But we'll learn about that some more as we move through the stream tonight. Okay. So going back to our next piece, it's really our next topic also, and that topic is, what is the damage that has been sustained by the Israelis? That's discussed in some detail in two recent posts by Larry Johnson. And we will look at the first of these posts right now. And it's Dee's turn, so I'm going to be turning it over to her as soon as I put up the post. Okay, there's the first of them. Okay, are you there, Dee?
Yes, I'm here. I just gotta enlarge this.
Okay.
Okay. Israel suffered extensive damage. 26 June 2025 by Larry Johnson.
Okay.
Here I saw some of the videos. People that were able to post, their videos. There were so many people that got arrested.
Yeah.
For streaming.
Okay, this is a graphic that asks, where did we go in 12 days of war? The we here, is the Iranians. In other words, where did they strike in the 12 days, of war? And you can see the targets. Okay, please go ahead, Dee.
Okay, want me to read off the targets?
Read off the targets as we
Okay, Al Jalil Base. That's the military headquarters of the army in northern Israel. The Haifa Port, oil docks, and naval base. Haifa Power Plant, Northern Israel Power Plant. Haifa Oil Refinery, the main supplier of energy and fuel. Tel Nof Air Base, military air base. Makar Massoud, regime intelligence organization. and the Karaya base, headquarters of the army of the regime. Kiryat Gat Industrial City, the hub of technology and chip making, and Israeli Ministry of War, headquarters of command and guidance, and Israel Nuclear Research Center,
Okay,
strategic area in Tel Aviv.
before we go to some of the targets, that are on the right side here, I do want to emphasize that, yeah, we're talking about the Iranians hitting those targets, but we're also talking about very heavy attacks that substantially damaged the targets. Uh, they fired hypersonic missiles. The payloads were substantial. Lots of these targets involve destruction of buildings, very heavy casualties. For example, take Mossad. Okay, there was destruction of the main building, of Mossad. There were reports that 3,000 people were killed. I'm not sure about that. That's just a report. But that report was certainly motivated by observation of very heavy damage, to Mossad. The oil refinery in Haifa was shut down. The power plant is shut down. The Haifa port, the oil dock, and naval base shut down. They can't do any business. Okay, the military air bases like the Tel Naf air base, very, very seriously damaged. The industrial city, very severely damaged. The Ministry of War, there's a report that the war minister, the defense minister, essentially, was killed. I haven't seen confirmation of that. Okay, but there has, been a report about that. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to the south of this. The research center. Okay, let's keep going. Okay,
Okay.
let's do this. Let's go to the furthest south, and then we'll go up again to the north. Okay.
Yeah. The Unit 8200, the cyber operation and eavesdropping center. That's always a big one.
That's a very, very big one. And that was severely damaged, if I recall. Okay, please go on.
The Avada Air Base, Electronic Warfare Control Center. The Nevatim Air Base, home to the regime's 435 fighter squadron.
Yeah, that's where the F-35 fly out from.
Yes, and that's where it's crucial for them to hit that.
Yeah, it's crucial for them to hit that, to destroy the runways, so the F-35s are not able to fly. There has been substantial damage done by the missiles, to Nevatim Air Base.
Yes.
Okay, when we talk about, the strategic area in Tel Aviv, the research center, what we're talking about there, is the very famous building, the Weitzman Center, named after the guy who was first president, of Israel. But it's a research center for nuclear research, for biological research, probably the top scientific research center in the whole of Israel. That was destroyed, I believe, on something like the third day of the war, but very, very serious damage in that area.
And it was a the scientific center at Yarsman Scientific Research Center.
Yes.
And then the Ben Gurion Airport, Tel Aviv's main airport.
Yeah, which has been shut down, I think, pretty much for the whole of the 12 days. In other words, I think flights going in and out of Israel have been shifted over to the military air bases. And they're having their troubles in those air bases too.
The power plant in one of the largest power plant in one of the largest power plants in Israel.
Yeah, it's a power plant that was supplied, by the oil refinery. Okay, that's why it's located there. And that power plant, I understand, was shut down.
And the Raphael Company, supplier of defense systems.
That's the leading defense company inside of Israel. It's a huge company. It's got a lot of foreign investments of various kinds. They have been very, very seriously hit. Okay, as well. Okay, so that's a map.
Yes, so they really got hit hard.
Yeah, a map of the outstanding damage that was done there. Okay, please continue reading, Dee.
Despite the arduous efforts of Israeli censors to hide the devastation Iran inflicted on Israel with its barrage of ballistic missiles during the 12-day war, information is emerging that destroys the myth that Israel had an impregnable air defense. The map at the head of this article reveals the sites targeted by Iran. Based on the videos of strikes in Haifa and Tel Aviv, I think this map accurately portrays the massive scale of the Iranian attack. For the first time in its history, Israel took a major beating. Well, actually, they were actually fighting a war.
They were fighting a war for the first time.
Yes.
Okay, instead of just having a series of killing fields.
Yes.
They would go and kill other people. Okay, this was a real war.
Right. According to various Israeli media reports, damage spanned residential buildings, scientific infrastructure, e.g. the labs at the Weizmann Institute in Rehovot, the Israeli Defense Ministry complex, and commercial hubs like the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. Iran also struck a military target near the Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba. The medical center was hit by the blast wave, which caused extensive structural damage, a chemical leak, and dozens of injuries. The Israeli press claimed this was a direct strike on Soroka, but the fact that no one was killed undermines that claim.
Yes, and I think the Iranians have made some statements about that and pointing out that there were various military targets that were surrounding the medical center. And those were the targets, okay, of the missiles, and they were the things that were hit dead center, as it were. The medical center was hit by blast waves from the missile. Okay, but it wasn't a direct strike on the medical center. Okay, please go on. Sorry.
Okay. Iran also struck the following residence area reportedly targeting Israeli military and intelligence officials. Bat Yam, 9 killed, 200 wounded, high-risk apartments destroyed. Ramat Gan, 9 buildings destroyed, hundreds displaced. Haifa and Tel Aviv strikes near military headquarters, Kiryat, and civilian neighborhoods. Iran also caused extensive damage to the port of Haifa and the port of Ashdod. Note, I had no information on the latter when I posted yesterday, as well as the refineries at Haifa and Ashdod. Israel has maintained a complete blackout on the damage to its military and intelligence facilities, but the sites identified on the map above indicate that Iran likely enjoyed similar success as that observed in Haifa and Tel Aviv.
Right, I should add here that the port of Ashdod, like the port of Haifa, has been thoroughly shut down. At the start of the war, there were 3 main ports inside of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
That were getting considerable traffic. Port of Haifa was the biggest one. Port of Ashdod was the second biggest. Okay, and then finally there was the port of Eilat in the south. That was shut down actually before the 12-day war. In other words, it was neutered, by early attacks. Okay, and by the Houthis' actions in the Red Sea, stopping shipping to the port. Okay, but the main point here is that all 3 of the major ports of Israel are shut down. Now that's tremendously damaging to the economic state of Israel. So that's the main point here. Please go on, Dee.
The following brief video shows Tel Aviv before and after. Israel got a taste of what it has done to the Palestinians in Gaza. It was a painful morsel.
Okay, keep going. I'm not going to play the video.
Despite Donald Trump's specious claim that the U.S. obliterated Iran's nuclear program, Israel's defense minister Katz is telling a different story.
Okay, I have to add here that there were reports that this particular defense minister was killed. Okay, those are unconfirmed, as yet, but just so you're aware, he perhaps, was telling a different story, but he may not be alive to continue telling it. And keep going.
Israel says it did not destroy all enriched uranium in Iran. Tried to assassinate Khamenei. Israel did not destroy all of Iran's highly enriched uranium and tried to kill Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei during its operation. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said in an interview to Channel 13 on Thursday evening. When asked about...
I believe that Katz was killed, actually, on on that very evening. Because I think I saw the report on Friday morning. Okay, please.
When asked about the 408 kilograms of highly enriched uranium the Iranians had before the war, and if it was moving inside Iran or taken out of the country, Katz said it was clear from the outset of our attack that we would not eliminate all of the material. The shared U.S.-Israeli position is that the Iranians will be asked to hand over the material.
And guess what kind of an answer they're going to get when they ask that?
Hell no.
I think it will be punctuated by a middle finger.
Yes.
Please go on.
So, what will Iran do? According to Ayatollah Khamenei, Iran will continue to enrich uranium, while the US and the IAEA will be stomping their feet and clamoring for Iran to give it up. I don't think that Iran is in a charitable mood. Trump has painted himself into a corner by his insistent and repeated claim that the US strikes eliminate Iran's uranium enrichment program. How can Iran surrender something that Trump says no longer exists? CNN is reporting that Trump is offering Iran a deal that is likely to cause Bibi Netanyahu to have a stroke. The Trump administration has discussed possibly helping Iran access as much as $30 billion to build a civilian energy producing nuclear program, easing sanctions and freeing up billions of dollars in restricted Iranian funds, all part of an intensifying attempt to bring Tehran back to the negotiating table, the table that they never left, for sources familiar with the matter said. Key players from the US and the Middle East have talked with the Iranians behind the scenes, even amid the flurry of military strikes in Iran and Israel over the past 2 weeks, the sources said. Those discussions have continued this week after a ceasefire deal was struck, the source said. Personally, I find it incomprehensible that Iran would trust any deal offered by Trump in light of his betrayal of the previous negotiations, i.e., he allowed Israel to launch the decapitation strike on June 13th, rather than postpone the action in order to continue talks, which were scheduled for June 15th. My advice to Iran is simple. Solidify your military ties to Russia and China. Launch a massive counterintelligence campaign to identify and eliminate those elements collaborating with Mossad and Western intelligence agencies. Replenish and harden air defense systems and build more ballistic missiles. Iran's situation reminds me of the scene from The Godfather, when Don Corleone's son debated about how to respond to the attempted murder of his father.
Okay.
There is a critical difference. I am not advocating that Iran strike back, as did Michael, by killing Solozo and the corrupt police captain. However, if there are any Iranian authorities who believe that Israel and Western intelligence agencies have given up on their dream of murdering Iranian leaders and collapsing the Iranian regime, they should be removed from office. In Washington, the brawl between Trump and the intelligence community is not over. I anticipated that DIA, the CIA, and the NSA will be producing additional intel that demonstrates beyond a reasonable doubt that Iran moved the enriched uranium. Trump boxed himself in with this statement today. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt had said on ABC News on Monday that the U.S. was, quote, confident Iran's nuclear programs was completely and totally obliterated, noting there was a, quote, high degree of confidence the locations the U.S. strikes took place is where Iran stored its enriched uranium and that Iran, quote, no longer has the capability to threaten the world. But the Telegraph is reporting, thanks to the Israeli sources, the opposite. Donald Trump will demand that Iran hand over all its enriched uranium as the price for peace, according to Israeli sources. A report.
How is Donald Trump going to know when they've handed over all of their?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
It's
And
ridiculous.
from what I understand, Donald Trump changed his mind on things again because he didn't like the reports that tweet that came out.
Yeah.
So, um, Okay. A report ahead of next week's U.S.-Iran talks said the U.S. is requiring the Islamic Republic to give up any nuclear fuel enriched to 60% or more, which is near weapons grade. Maybe the Iranians have a mischievous sense of humor and will ask Trump's negotiators, quote, how can we turn over something that President Trump said he obliterated? At some point, I expect Trump will do one of his pivots and admit that Iran is hiding its enriched uranium. I discussed some of these issues today with Garland Nixon.
Right. And that's the end of that particular thing.
Yeah, well, I was going to say Trump got annoyed at the tweet that Khamenei put out there about how they won, and Trump saying he won. So Trump said he's not going to let go of the sanctions and all that other stuff. He didn't like the tweet.
Right.
It's crazy.
Okay, there's a second article by Larry Johnson coming up. Would you like to take that one also? Because just after,
Okay.
I'm going to be covering a pretty long piece by Alexander Mercouris.
Okay. That
So,
sounds fine.
okay, so I'll share the screen here for the second of Larry's pieces. Okay, this was on the 27th.
27th. Okay. Update on Iran's targeting of Israel's defense industry. 27 June 2025 by Larry C. Johnson. Raphael sites in Israel. David facility. Wow, that was it. David facility headquarters, Mana Advanced Defense, Land Naval Division, Ordnance Systems Division, and Technologies Division.
Okay, that is
In
located
Haifa.
in Haifa, yes.
Yes, and that's why there were so many, missile strikes in Haifa. And also with Yemen too, in Haifa, near Haifa. Galilee, Air Superiority Systems Division, Air and Sea ISR Systems Division. And then there's Tel Aviv offices, the vicinity to IMOD IDF headquarters, vicinity to Peer Industries, hosting international customers.
Yeah,
And then,
all important.
yes. And Palmahim, National Test Ranges, and Shadema, providing services to IMOD, IDF, and industry site, and industry-wide.
Okay.
Israel is doing a damn fine imitation of Lieutenant Frank Drebin, a character played by Leslie Nielsen in the 1988 comedy film The Naked Gun, from the Files of Police Squad. In an iconic sense, Lieutenant Drebin stands in front of a fireworks explosion and chaos while trying to calm the crowd by saying, quote, nothing to see here, please disperse, nothing to see here. Despite the absurd mayhem beyond him, he earnestly pretends that nothing is wrong, a hallmark of the film's slapstick deadpan humor. That's exactly what Israel is doing in the wake of 12 days of Iranian missile attacks all across the length of Israel. According to the IDF, Iran was only able to hit 36 targets out of over 500 missiles and 1,000 drones fired by Iran, right? Israel's Channel 13 says otherwise.
Okay, go ahead.
Channel 13 says otherwise.
Right. Channel 13 does say otherwise.
Yes. Iran claims it attacked almost all scientific, research, and academic centers, factories, and industries affiliated with Rafael and Elbit systems, as well as other arms manufacturing and artificial intelligence factories. For example, Iran claims it destroyed Intel's chip manufacturing plant located in the occupied settlement of Kiryat Gat south of Tel Aviv. If true, this has inflicted as much as 5 billion in losses on the Zionist regime, facilities and factories of other US companies in Israel, which include Intel, Microsoft, Tesla, Google, and Apple also were targeted by Iran. Rafael and Elbit systems are deeply integrated into Israel's defense, academic, and industrial landscape. Rafael has strong ties with Ben-Gurion University and maintains multiple R&D and production sites across Israel, while Elbit Systems leads national research consortia and operates numerous factories, including those acquired from IMI Systems. Both companies maintain extensive collaboration with the Israeli Ministry of Defense and partner with a wide range of academic, governmental, and industrial industries. Here's a summary of the affiliates. Rafael Advanced Defense Systems affiliations, academic and research centers. Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, BGU, Rafael has a significant research and development branch at the Advanced Technologies Park, ATP, adjacent to BGU in Beersheba. This partnership allows Rafael to tap into BGU's engineering talent and research, particularly in fields like cybersecurity, robotics, and high-tech engineering. Other R&D centers, Rafael maintains research and development centers in Haifa, its headquarters, Hadera, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Beersheba. Industrial and production facilities. Haifa, main headquarters and primary R&D and manufacturing site. Shalomi, new production branch opened in 2021 near Israel's border with Lebanon. Other locations expanded operations in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Beersheba. International joint ventures. Rafael has a joint venture with Raytheon in Arkansas, USA for production of Tamir interceptors for the Iron Dome and its U.S. variant Skyhunter. Industry partnerships. Israeli Ministry of Defense. Rafael was founded as Israel's national R&D laboratory for the MOD and maintains a close relationship with about half its sales to the MOD. Over 100 governmental aviation, space, and defense organizations. Rafael collaborates with numerous entities in Israel and abroad, leveraging mutual technology strengths. Elbit Systems affiliations, academic and research centers. Israel Innovation Authority Consortium. Elbit Systems leads a consortium approved by the Israeli Innovation Authority focusing on human-robot interaction technologies, HRI. This consortium includes leading robotic companies and academic researchers specializing in artificial intelligence, computer science, and behavioral sciences. Industrial and production facilities. Headquarters, based in Israel with multiple subsidiaries and production facilities across the country. IMI Systems, formerly Israeli Military Industries, acquired by Elbit in 2018, expanding its industry base. Industry partnerships, Israel Ministry of Defense. Elbit is a major supplier to the MOD, recently signing significant contracts for domestic production of munitions and raw materials. Subsidiaries includes Elisra, and other notable Israeli defense technology companies. I do not know if we will ever get a genuine, truthful battle damage assessment out of Israel, but I think that Israel's quick embrace of the ceasefire signals that many of the installations listed above were hit by Iranian missiles Iran destroyed the myth of Israeli invincibility.
Just to make a comment there, I think it's hard to ignore that conclusion. Because when you look at this list of organizations, okay, that have been hit, and you realize they've been hit, by ballistic missiles and hypersonic ballistic missiles, uh, often with very uh, heavy payloads, 500-pound payloads, roughly speaking, uh, in terms of kilograms. Uh, um, sometimes even as high as 1,000 kilograms, uh, uh, which is a ton of explosives. Buildings were destroyed. When you see the videos and you see the pictures, much of the Israeli landscape is resembling what the Israelis did to Gaza. It's just really, there's just an impressive amount of damage there.
Mhm.
Please go on.
Meanwhile, back in Washington, Donald Trump continued his triumph, the insult comedy dog act, by unloading on Ayatollah Khamenei. Why would the so-called, quote, supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, of the war-torn country of Iran, say so blatantly and foolishly that he won the war with Israel, when he knows his statement is a lie? It is not so. As a man of great faith, he is not supposed to lie. He's not lying. His country was decimated. His 3 evil nuclear sites were obliterated, and I knew exactly where he was sheltered. And I would not let Israel or the U.S. Armed Forces, by far the greatest and most powerful in the world, terminate his life. I saved him from a very ugly and enormous death, and he. Uh, you keep moving.
Okay.
No, I was trying to read, and you. And
Oh,
you.
okay. Did I move too fast?
Yes. See where. Okay.
Oh, here it is. Yeah.
Yeah, the ignominious death, and he does not have to say thank you, President Trump. In fact, in the final act of the war, I demanded that Israel bring back a very large group of planes which were heading directly to Tehran, looking for a big day, perhaps the final knockout. Tremendous damage would have ensued, and many Iranians would have been killed. It was going to be the biggest attack of the war by far. During the last few days, I was working on the possible removal of sanctions and other things, which would have given a much better chance to Iran at a full, fast, and complete recovery. The sanctions are biting, but no, instead, I get hit with a statement of anger, hatred, and disgust, and immediately dropped all work on sanction relief and more. Iran has to get back into the world order flow, or things will only get worse for them. They are always so angry and hostile and unhappy, and look at what it has gotten them. A burned out, blown up country with no future, a decimated military, a horrible economy, and death all around them. They have no hope, and it will only get worse. I wish the leadership of Iran would realize that you often get more with honey than you do with vinegar. Peace. He's such an idiot.
I couldn't agree more.
I mean,
Okay.
doesn't that sound like kids, maybe junior high school kids, the way they would talk to each other?
Yes. Sounds like a junior high school kid.
Yeah.
Absolutely sounds like a junior high school kid.
Maybe Trump should consider taking his own advice, i.e., you get more with honey than you do with vinegar. Trump's, Trump's tirade elicited this response from Iran's foreign minister. The complexity and tenacity of Iranians is famously known in our magnificent carpets woven through countless hours of hard work and patience. But as people, our basic premise is very simple and straightforward. We know our worth, value, value our independence, and never allow anyone else to decide our destiny. If President Trump is genuine about wanting a deal, he should put aside the disrespectful and unacceptable tone towards Iran's Supreme Leader, Grand Ayatollah Khamenei, and stop hurting his millions of heartfelt followers. The great and powerful Iranian people who showed the world that the Israeli regime had no choice but to run to, quote, daddy to avoid being flattened by our missiles, do not take kindly to threats and insults. If illusions lead to worse mistakes, Iran will not hesitate to unveil its real capabilities, which will certainly end any delusion about the power of Iran. Goodwill begets goodwill, and respect begets respect. Now that was, you know, well written, put together.
It's a great statement.
Yeah,
It's a great statement, and as we will see later, some of those words are really important. Like,
yeah,
will not hesitate to unveil its real capabilities.
yeah.
Suggesting they have not revealed their real capabilities yet,
Hmm.
which will certainly end uh, on, on any delusion, about the power, of Iran.
Hmm.
So that's really pretty explicit that they've got a surprise waiting for Daddy
Yeah.
if he continues to persist.
Yeah. If Trump is trying to woo the Iranians back to the negotiating table, he may want to change his use of insults and character assassinations. Just saying, based on this latest exchange of messages, I think substantive talks between Iran and the US are unlikely.
So do I. I think they're very unlikely too.
I do too, because there was the hesitation in the beginning because, the US is not trustworthy.
Yes, and the U.S. proved that. So
Yes.
why should there be any more talks? In other words, how could the U.S. prove that what it promised in any talks would really come to pass?
Right, and it's just a waste of time.
Yes, in other words, the U.S. would have to negotiate some agreements that were self enforcing because the Iranians couldn't possibly trust anything Trump had to say. So there's that.
Hmm. Today, I discussed the latest developments in West Asia and the Middle East with Nima and with Judge Napolitano and Brother Ray McGovern. I also am posting a conversation from yesterday with Michael Farris.
And so there are the videos which you can follow if you have the time. They're all very good, okay, and worthwhile videos. I've seen, okay, the Nima video. That's an excellent piece. And I saw the Ray McGovern video as well. Okay, I don't think I've seen the Michael Paris video. That's the third one.
Okay.
But I'm sure that's a very good one too. So now I think it's time to move up, to the Alexander Mercouris analysis.
Do you want to see how the comments look first?
Yes, I do. Yeah, there are some comments. Evelina says, all strategic points, no civilian targets, quote unquote. That's true. There weren't civilian targets. Iran didn't play the game that way. Here, I have to point out that the number of civilian casualties in Israel is supposed to be less than 100 somewhere. I think 50 or 60 civilian casualties with all those missiles flying and all the property damage that was done, all the destruction of key points like the oil refinery at Haifa, the 3 ports, the major military and intelligence buildings. All that was done, yet very few people were killed as far as the Iranians were concerned. On the other hand, the Israelis in all their attacks have so far killed about 1,000 Iranians. So the devastation by Iran, which we saw, did not involve any civilian targets. Evelina says casualties in the Mossad building are not civilian. That's true, of course. Evelina says, I read there was concern about scarcity of food and medicine after the ports were shut. I think that's a reasonable conclusion to draw. And Evelina says, Iran doesn't use the middle finger. They use the index pointing to Allah. Okay. Yeah, the middle finger. Steve says, okay, it sounds like Israel got its ass kicked. I think in many ways, it did. Now, there was a lot of damage done, to Iran also. So I don't want to give the one-sided impression, but if you're interested in the counts of the damage that was done to Iran, all you have to do is turn to the mainstream press, because they'll be emphasizing that kind of damage, I'm sure. But we were trying to provide a corrective here. So that's why we did it in this way. Anyway, let us move on to the Alexander Mercouris discussion. It's not a discussion, it's a monologue. We'll try to provide some discussion as we move forward with it. But here it is. Okay, it's a YouTube video. You're seeing it right now. We started out from about 19 minutes and 28 seconds in. The whole video is about 1 hour, 23 minutes and 28 seconds. We'll be playing this to roughly the 41-minute mark, 41 minute and 25 seconds. Okay, so roughly 22 minutes, but it'll probably take us about 3/4 of an hour to get through. So the title of the video is Iran Rejects U.S. Offer, Hints at a Nuclear Decision. And Putin says no to meeting Trump, and the Russians enter the city of Kupiansk. I'm not going to cover the Ukrainian parts of this video, but I'll end our discussion at 41 minutes and 25 seconds in, or roughly that. So let's begin. Let me expand this to full screen.
Take kindly to threats and insults. If illusions lead to worse mistakes, Iran will not hesitate to unveil its real capabilities, which will certainly.
This is a quote from the statement of the foreign minister of Iran that we just read as part of Larry Johnson's piece. So Alexander Mercouris is reading that, okay, as well.
Certainly end any delusion about the power of Iran. Now, I think that there is here both advice and a warning. The advice is that if you really do want to make a deal with your adversary and perhaps one-day partner, that it is not a good idea to insult them in the way that Donald Trump has just insulted Ayatollah Khamenei. But consider the first, the further words that are actually used. If illusions lead to worse mistakes, Iran will not hesitate to unveil its real capabilities. And the words real capabilities, real, the first letter is capitalized, and C in the word capabilities is capitalized also. So those words are given additional emphasis. And it actually then goes on to say that these will certainly end, and the entire word end is capitalized, any delusion, and the first letter of the word delusion is capitalized, about the power, and the word power, the first letter of power is capitalized, of Iran. Now, again, maybe I'm reading more into this than is there, but that does look to me like a hint that Iran is now seriously considering going nuclear. And if there is any more attacks on Iran in future, that could tip the whole internal debate that is taking place in Iran towards that direction. Now, I know that there are many people who continue to insist that Iran will never go nuclear. I have previously made clear my own skepticism about this view. I think that people are placing too much reliance on Khamenei's fatwa, assuming that a fatwa is like some kind of papal decree under the infallibility doctrine, which cannot be challenged or set aside or reversed.
So that point is very important. He's saying that a fatwa is not like a papal decree. Quite important.
Khamenei's fatwa, anyway.
This is why you shouldn't buy just one Mazzato knife. If you only buy one, you're just losing money.
And by the way, it's been reissued by Khamenei on several occasions, has always struck me as being slightly more qualified than many people suppose. But Khamenei is not a pope-like figure. And I think this is a thing that perhaps many people don't fully grasp. His fatwa is always open to challenge within Iran, from within the Islamic community of scholars. It is not, so far as I can see, universally accepted. And back in the autumn,
I think that point is also very important, because what he's alluding to is a process inside of the Shia form, okay, of Islam, where some authority states a position which supposedly is based on scholarship and offers it to the community. But in spite of the fact that the scholar, may be a supreme leader, okay, and very, very important, his finding, his fatwa, is still subject to discussion and subject to challenge. by other scholars. And the other scholars can sometimes win the day or change the minds of the community. So this is certainly not like a papal bull or a papal decree, because philosophically, the stamp of infallibility is simply not there. It's not placed onto fatwas.
I can clearly remember a whole succession of Iranian officials, of whom perhaps the most important was General Salami, the now assassinated head of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
He was assassinated, I believe, on the first or second day of the war, unfortunately.
Making it fairly clear that as far as they were concerned, Khamenei's position was made no sense, and that Iran should indeed move forward to develop a nuclear weapons capability, because without it, there was no security from an attack by Israel or the United States. Now, here, I'm going to express my own view about Iran's stance. I've already said that I've always found it very difficult to understand why, if Iran really is committed to its policy of not moving forward towards a full nuclear weapons capability, it enriched uranium up to a level of 60%. There's been a common view expressed by many extremely intelligent people that what the Iranian people, I should stress, I have massive respect for, that what the Iranians were doing by enriching uranium to that level was strengthening their negotiating hand by putting some kind of pressure on the United States. It's always seemed to me that that made little sense. Ultimately, if you are going to enrich uranium up to 60%, but are never going to move towards acquiring a full...
You can sell this $5 spatula on Amazon and compete with hundreds of other spatula sellers, or
nuclear weapons capability, you are engaging in a very dangerous bluff with the very real risk always that that bluff is going to be called, which in a sense is what has happened over the last 2 weeks. I've never really understood this policy, and I am going to suggest that, in fact, rather than see it as a negotiation tactic, it's probably easier and better to understand it as the product of arguments and divisions within the Iranian leadership, resulting in an unhappy compromise whereby those who have advocated Iran acquiring a nuclear capability have been bought off with a commitment to enrich uranium up to a level of 60%. And those like President Pezeshkian and others who oppose Iran acquiring a nuclear weapons capability have in turn been reassured that that will never actually happen. Now, having been somebody who has seen governments function from the inside, I have to say that these kind of unhappy compromises are very common, particularly where there is no single coherent, united team moving and working together towards the same objective. And it strikes me that Iran does fall within the second, within that that category of countries. It seems to me that the Khamenei himself is clearly the supreme leader. and the ultimate policymaker. The structure of power in Iran effectively precludes him from taking direct day-to-day management of decisions, and he has to balance decisions between various lobby groups and factions. And besides, I also get the sense that his own inclinations to some extent point that way. And out of that kind of rather decentralized and diffused decision-making process, unsatisfactory compromises like the one I've described, and I have to say, I've seen, to repeat again, I've seen compromises like that which fully satisfy no one but manage to keep everybody just about on side. I've seen that happen on far too many occasions.
So what is he saying? He's saying that the decision to enrich to 61%, okay, but not to go further, is a compromise position that the moderates inside of Iran did not want to have that kind of enrichment. But the IRGC faction inside of Iran is very strong and was probably strongly lobbying, and probably has been for some time, for bringing the process to a close and getting a nuclear weapon. And through this particular time of conflict, their pressure to get a nuclear weapon has probably grown. That probably counts for the acceleration, okay, in the production of more and more stocks up to the level of 61%. The IRGC has probably been pushing on the authorities in Iran to get more and more to 61%, just in case the Ayatollah decides to change the fatwa and to conclude that there's an existential threat to the country of Iran. The Ayatollah has said before he might consider changing the fatwa finding if we got to a place of existential threat for the state of Iran. The way the United States has been moving on Iran, and the way Israel, has been moving on Iran, I think the circumstances have been building in such a way that Iran is getting closer and closer to an existential threat. And so the expectation of people, the expectation of the peace groups, the expectation of the IRGC, and the expectation of the strongest of the followers, of the supreme leader, is that if we reach the level of existential threat, then at that point, he's going to come up with another finding, another fatwa, and there is going to be a change. And the actions of the United States and Israel are encouraging that particular change. And this is in line with what the IRGC wants to do. In other words, the IRGC response to violations of the JCPOA was to enrich to 61%. It was to take that halfway position, wait for the supreme leader to change the fatwa, but while they're waiting to produce plenty of 61%, so they'd be very close to getting a bomb. So that was the compromise position to satisfy the IRGC while not actually moving to change the fatwa. So that's what I think Alexander is saying. And I think that's a pretty good interpretation. I think it's a pretty good analysis of what has been going on there. It explains why the 61% solution doesn't seem to be a rational solution. But if you look at it as essentially being produced by a political conflict of factions, well, then it doesn't have to make a whole lot of sense. Because in political systems, whether Persia's political system or United States political systems, compromise positions often don't make very much sense. And I think that's the situation here. Yes, it's waving the red flag, okay, in front of the bull. And ironically, that makes the bull act in such a way that it reinforces the position of the IRGC and raises the probability that Iran will go the whole way to a nuclear bomb. Going on.
I suspect that the Iranian political system is exactly the kind of system where you would expect a compromise like this to emerge out of a bitterly fought out debate between groups or factions, if you prefer, within the power structure, which cannot prevail against each other. Well, the events of the last 2 weeks, I think, have tilted the balance decisively, almost certainly, in favor of those who argue that after all that's happened, Iran really does need to move forward to acquire a proper nuclear weapons capability. Now, in order to get a sense of how this might work out, there is no better place than to go to a truly brilliant article written by Arnaud Bertrand on his Substack, which its title is "The Key Lesson from Iran: Kim Jong-un was right about everything." And this article is a scintillatingly clear explanation of why, from this point onward, it would make sense. In fact, it would make compelling sense for Iran to decide to go nuclear. And I'm not going to read the whole article because, of course, it is on Substack. It's also quite long, but beyond that, it's obviously behind a paywall. But it contains comments like this. It says Iran was paradoxically in many ways too transparent, reasonable, and cooperative, accepting international monitoring that provided targeting intelligence, engaging in diplomatic processes that turned out to be elaborate traps, and honoring agreements that were unilaterally abandoned. And again, it's difficult to argue with any of that. And then Arnaud Bertrand goes on to then set out the 4 key lessons, and he begins with,
"Hey babe, can you open this jar of pickles for me?"
Come on, Daddy, give her the pickle.
Lesson 1, you must have nuclear weapons, but you need to develop them outside any international monitoring. And he says, when North Korea decided it actually needed nuclear weapons in the early 2000s, it permanently withdrew from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, kicked out all international inspectors, and refused any monitoring. Then in 2006, it conducted its first nuclear test and became essentially untouchable. And then he describes what Iran did in contrast. Iran, by contrast, trying to do things the responsible way, maintaining IAEA monitoring agreements, even while developing nuclear capabilities. Did that help them? Quite the contrary. Every major facility hit in the recent strikes was precisely known to attackers because of ongoing IAEA inspections.
So there it is. Actually joining the NPT, conforming to it, and going through the inspections creates a situation where you're making itself extremely vulnerable to people who already have nuclear weapons and who are not signatories, okay, of the NPT.
Iran's transparency didn't earn protection. It provided a targeting manual.
It provided a temptation. It provided a temptation. It would have been better off actually not to have done anything. Even maybe better off to have bluffed it first and claimed they had it when they didn't have it. Especially since they had the technical capability to actually produce a nuclear weapon. Certainly at roughly the same time, if not before, as the North Koreans.
And that's absolutely correct. And in fact, no less a person than the Iranian Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, has again made precisely that very same point. He has made this comment. The Parliament of Iran has voted for a halt to collaboration with the IAEA until the safety and security of our nuclear activities can be guaranteed. Now, notice those words again. The safety and security of our nuclear activities can be guaranteed. And then he goes on to say this. This is a direct result of Rafael Grossi's regrettable role in obfuscating the fact that the agency, a full decade ago, already closed all past issues. This is the questions of what Iran had been doing with its nuclear program of the 1990s, which I have discussed in many places and many times, and I'm not going to return to here. The fact being that Iran did have a nuclear program, which it did try to keep secret in the 1990s, but it owned up to it completely in the early 2000s, and previously the IAEA accepted that this was a historic program that had no relevance to the situation of today. And then Araghchi goes on to say, through his...
Should this futuristic toothbrush be banned from the US? Ever wonder how celebrities always have such amazing white teeth? It's not because they're brush...
Through this malign action, this is by bringing up the whole topic of what Iran was doing 20 years ago, resurrecting that now dead issue through this malign action. Grossi directly facilitated the adoption of a politically motivated resolution against Iran by the IAEA Board of Governors, as well as the unlawful Israeli and US bombings of Iranian nuclear sites. He is absolutely right about this. The Russian government has said the same in forthright terms. And then Araghchi goes on to say, in an astounding betrayal of his duties, Rafael Grossi has additionally failed to explicitly condemn such blatant violations of IAEA safeguards and its statutes. And he means there, what he's referring to there, is the Israeli and American attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities, which were being inspected and monitored by the IAEA itself, and were covered by its safeguards and its statute, and which therefore should have been protected from an attack. And then
that point is also very, very important. If you're being inspected and you're complying with the treaty and you're opening yourself up to all sorts of investigations, that fact alone should be protection against an attack from other nations. It should be protection, certainly, from an attack by the United States, which is actually a signatory to the treaty. But it should be protection from the Israelis also, even though they're not actually signatories, to the treaty. Certainly the members, the people who have signed up to the treaty, should be ready to condemn anyone that moves forward and attacks a compliant member of the treaty that is going through the process of being transparent to all of the other members. When the treaty group doesn't defend the member that is behaving in a way called for by the treaty, but instead is silent when that member gets attacked by a third party that is not a member of the treaty, then what the other members are saying implicitly is this treaty doesn't matter. We don't really support it. We think it's a useless treaty because we're not doing anything to defend the treaty and the people who are attempting to comply with it. So the Western members of the treaty, all of the members of NATO, by the way, plus also many, many other nations that have signed up to the treaty, they all should have stood with Iran. And the members of the treaty, who were parts of the collective West, have been silent in the face of the U.S. attack on Iran and the Israeli attacks on Iran. They've basically said, we're willing to rip up this treaty. We don't feel obligated to defend this treaty. But if they don't feel obligated to defend it, then why should other members who signed up to it feel obligated to conform to the demands of the treaty and the requirements of the treaty? In their own actions, the members of the collective West that have signed up to the treaty have themselves rejected the treaty. So now the Iranians have decided they're not going to cooperate with the IAEA. And while they've not actually decided yet to withdraw from the treaty group, I think the likelihood is they will. Because if the treaty cannot prevent them from an unprovoked attack, what good is it? If its members are not willing to provide any protection, then what good are they?
Abbas Araghchi goes on to say, the IAEA and its Director General are fully responsible for this sordid state of affairs. Rafael Grossi's insistence on visiting the bomb sites under the pretext of safeguards is meaningless and possibly even malign in its intent. Iran reserves the right to take any steps in its defense of its interests, its people, and its sovereignty. Again, notice the word any steps in defense of its interests, people, and sovereignty. Anyway, let's just move on and go back now to what Arnaud Bertrand has said.
Still overpaying for cookie banners and legal policies? What if I told you you could handle GDP?
He then makes the same point about Gross's behavior that I have made on many programs, that Alex Christoforou has made in a absolutely excoriating program that he did about Gross's behavior on his channel, and which Alex and I have also made on the Duran, and which of course have also been made by many people. This is what Arnaud Bertrand says. Worse still, the day before Israel strikes began, the IAEA found Iran non-compliant with its nuclear obligations for the first time in 20 years, essentially rewarding Iran for its decades-long collaboration with the agency by giving Israel diplomatic cover for the attack. The lesson is not only stark, not only did Israel and US behavior validate the crucial importance of developing nuclear weapons, but it also proved that maintaining any cooperation or transparency while developing them is suicidal. It just helps your enemy target you more effectively. And then Arnaud Bertrand says that diplomacy is worse than use.
Yeah, which is the central point here. It only helps your opponent to target you. That's all it does. And if you don't want to do that, then you need to get out of the treaty.
He says that Iran got trapped into a diplomatic process, which is revealed to be a ruse, using fake negotiations to buy time for a joint US-Israeli attack, whilst justifying that attack as Iran's failure to accept purposefully unacceptable conditions. Now, I've already expressed my own view here that I'm not sure that it was quite as Machiavellian as many people, including Arnaud Bertrand, think. But then again, it doesn't really matter, because it's not what someone like I think about this. It's about the effect on Iran. They were negotiating. They were negotiating with all appearance of good faith, and instead they were attacked whilst those negotiations were underway. And then lesson 3, and again, Arnaud Bertrand says, reject all Western technology and build completely indigenous systems. And he makes the point that North Korea is essentially cyber-proof because it uses purely indigenous systems. Russia and China are becoming the same. China probably already is. Russia largely is. I've mentioned in the past how back in 2017, the Washington Post spoke about how the United States had inserted cyber bombs into Russia's infrastructure, and how, despite all of that, after the start of the special military operation, no evidence ever came to light of those cyber bombs being operated effectively by the United States, which to my mind confirms that the Russians took effective countermeasures, and which they have almost certainly developed as they have steadily replaced Western technology within their infrastructure with Russian technology. Anyway, Arnaud Bertrand makes the point that Iran didn't do this, so that the result was that the Iranians found that they not only had the Israelis and the Americans inside their systems, but able to conduct cyber attacks and make, by the way, totally unacceptable threats to Iranian generals via their cell phones, threatening those generals not just with personal assassination, but with actions against their families. Now, when I heard about this, I found that so disturbing that those sort of threats were made that I have to say I didn't want to believe that those reports were true. I wanted to believe that they might have been the kind of fake news that is now always circulating, but is so often circulating. But it seems that one of the conversations, the famous leaked conversation, the famous leaked recording of threats being made directly to an Iranian general of that kind that has circulated, has actually been validated by the Washington Post. That is apparently what I have heard. And that...
Plan your visit today to experience Biltmore at its brightest. Kids visit free all summer.
This is the quickest way to clear out stuck poop. I have to poop, but it feels stuck. Stop!
Sorry.
It might have been leaked by Mossad itself as a way of basically making it clear that this is what the Israelis are prepared to do. I have to say, this is so disturbing, it is so terrible, that again, the extent to which this kind of behavior is not only tolerated by support, but also supported by Western governments, on top of everything else that Israel has been doing in the last 3 years in Gaza and elsewhere. I mean, it just, as I said, leaves me speechless. But
yes, it leaves me speechless too. The perfidy of the West, the contemptibility of the West in what it's willing to do, doesn't know any bounds, knows no bounds. That is all that you can say about it. But to summarize this, when it comes to what Iran ought to do now, it's really pretty clear that if it wants to protect itself, it has to go the way of North Korea as quickly as it can. It has to get a nuclear deterrent in order to protect itself from the United States, and Israel. I could go into more detail on this. I'm not going to go into it for obvious reasons, but if you sit down and you think about this for a while, you can begin to think about the outlines of such a deterrent and what Iran would have to do. It's not simply a matter of developing the bomb or getting the bomb. Okay. It's a matter of the delivery systems. And the delivery systems have to be effective enough to deter the powers who are contemplating a nuclear action to attack you with. So in general terms, that is what Iran would have to do. Okay, so that ends that piece. I will now consider your comments on it. Steve Wolfbrand says, I'm back. He evidently left for a while after 10:09 and then came back. Thank you, Steve. Evelina says the compromise decision is an interesting one between the moderates and the military. Also, the point that the supreme leader is not a pope-like figure and is not seen as infallible. That is very interesting. And it is very interesting. And Evelina says more insights into Iranians, the Iranians. Then she says, thanks, Dr. Joe and Dee, for tonight's show. Well, thank you for coming, Evelina. We always appreciate you coming to our shows.
Yes. Yes, we do.
We still have two more things to go over. And the first thing is an article on the truth. It's from the blog, of Larry Johnson, Sonar 21, but it is not by Larry Johnson himself. It nevertheless is very significant to look at in light of all the deception we've been encountering from the Western side in the negotiations with Iran that we've been seeing. The title of it is Truth. Truth wins. Why lying guarantees long-term failure. And the author of it is the Frontier Man. And it was actually written on the 24th of June, 2025. Do you want to take this, Dee, or would you like me to?
You could take it.
Okay. So it begins, of course, with the famous phrase from the book of John, quote, the truth shall make you free, unquote. I've always been attracted to that little phrase. The first section is the lie that changed the world. In 2003, the United States led a coalition to invade Iraq, claiming that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, and posed an imminent threat. This justification was repeated before Congress, the American public, and the United Nations. But after the invasion, no WMDs were found. The central reason for the war, the one that rallied international support and domestic approval, was a lie. It was a lie. And I remember myself, at that time, I was one of those who accepted the lie in 2003 and who thought, that if Saddam had the WMDs, it was too dangerous a situation to allow him to go on. Now, I think differently about such subjects, at this point. But at that time, I thought that the risk presented by the WMDs outweighed the possibility that he did not have WMDs, and that the cost aspect of that risk was so great that the intervention was actually justified. Of course, sometime later, I changed my mind about that. But, of course, the point about this is that the central premise was a lie. Going on with the article, while this...
Oh, yes, you got to put it up on the screen.
Oh, thank you, Dee.
You're welcome.
Yes, I got to put it up on the screen. By the way, we have 62 people here. That is pretty good. Well, the slide provided the false pretext needed to start the war in Iraq. Its long-term effects were devastating. Global trust in America collapsed. Key allies grew skeptical of the motives of the United States, and future diplomatic efforts, from nuclear negotiations to alliances, were complicated by damage to the credibility of the United States. This episode illustrates a deeper truth. In international strategy, lying can sometimes win battles, but it rarely wins the war. And to understand why, we can turn to game theory, the study of how players, in this case, nations, make decisions when their choices affect and are affected by others. This essay explores how countries choose between telling the truth and lying, and how that choice shapes their ability to form alliances, enforce agreements, and ultimately succeed or fail. And the next section is the temptation to lie and why lies ultimately backfire. Lying can offer short-term gains. A country might claim peaceful intentions while preparing for war. It might make false promises to win allies or to stall for time when it comes to negotiations. In game theory, this kind of deception is called, quote, cheap talk, unquote, statements that are not directly tied to any cost or action. Cheap talk only works if others come to believe it, which is true. Now, we have to note here that the cheap talk in this specific case were the statements made by the United States, about wanting to negotiate with Iran, okay, and coming to agreement with Iran, and also implicitly not attacking during the time of the negotiations. In other words, giving the negotiations a chance to work. So what were the benefits of the cheap talk, okay, in this instance? Well, the benefits were that on the first day of the war, an initial big advantage was given to the United States and to Israel. When Israel started attacking Iran, the first day was a big success for the Israelis. It took the Iranians some time to adjust. By the second day, though, they were already retaliating, and Israel was starting to pay a price. When later the United States attacked Iran, and Trump has gone around saying, we eliminated completely their capability to continue with a nuclear program. With Trump constantly saying that, of course, this lie is becoming costly for him, because now that it might not be true, what he said about its being true is being thrown in his face. Some people don't want to immediately change direction from the exaggerated claims and say, oh, we need more attacks. They want to stay with the premise, this was a very successful attack and we don't need to do anything more. So there's a cost for that lie that Trump was telling. It was clearly a lie. It was just Trump just exaggerating for PR purposes the results of what was actually done. Going on, the U.S. claims that WMDs in Iraq were a textbook case. They gained immediate support for military action. But once the lie was revealed, the reputational damage was immense, especially among countries that had trusted the word of the United States. While lying might work in one-off kinds of interactions, international relations are rarely one-time affairs. Countries interact repeatedly through trade, diplomacy, military alliances, and crisis negotiations. In such repeated interactions, the past track record of participants matters. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. Sometimes it's impossible to rebuild. I add that. This idea is known in game theory as, quote, the shadow of the future, unquote. If a country knows that today's lie will ruin tomorrow's chances of cooperation, it may choose instead to tell the truth, even if it means a temporary disadvantage. Of course, Trump, never seems to believe that. He always seems to believe that the results of any lie he tells are going to be so devastating to the opponents that there won't be a future that he has to contend with. Of course, by now in life, he should have the experience necessary to conclude that the future does matter, and that quite often it's important to tell the truth, because that will benefit you in the future. That's an aspect of trust. The cost of lost credibility. Let's break this down with a simple example from game theory, the prisoner's dilemma. Okay, by the way, I was doing experiments, with that particular game since the fall of 1965. For roughly 5 years, from 1965 to 1970. Two players have a choice: cooperate, tell the truth, or betray, lie. If both cooperate, then both are going to benefit. If one betrays while the other cooperates, the betrayer wins big, but the cooperator suffers. If both betray, however, both lose. In repeated rounds, the smart move is usually to cooperate, building mutual trust over time. The U.S. decision to exaggerate intelligence about Iraq was a betrayal of that trust. As a result, many nations, including longtime allies, became wary of future American claims. The damage wasn't restricted to the political. It became strategic. When trust collapses, then diplomatic deals break down. Alliances are going to weaken, and rivals grow. Bolder. How to win friends? China's strategy of truth and predictability. While the U.S. has suffered reputational blows due to moments of deception, China has pursued a different, sorry about that, China has pursued a different strategy in recent decades, specifically predictability and consistency, especially in economic diplomacy. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, China has made long-term infrastructure and investment deals with dozens of countries. While some criticize the debt terms or geopolitical motives, most partners continue to work with China because it delivers on its promises. China has carefully built an image of a partner that delivers on its promises. In game theory terms, this is a repeated cooperation strategy, where trust is built through a consistent follow-through. Over time, this has allowed China to expand its influence in Africa, Southeast Asia, and parts of Europe without firing a shot. Meanwhile, countries burned by broken promises from others, including the U.S., often look to China as a more stable, as an alternative that is more stable. Who wins in the long run? So which strategy works better, lying for short-term gain or being truthful to preserve long-term trust? Game theory offers an answer through a result known as the Folk theorem. In repeated games where players interact, where they interact again and again, a wide range of cooperative outcomes is possible, as long as each player values future gains more than short-term rewards. In simpler terms, if you care about tomorrow, it pays to tell the truth today. This means that in the real world, where nations are locked in constant interaction through trade, diplomacy, climate talks, and military cooperation, credibility becomes a strategic asset. A country that loses it can no longer make effective deals, deter aggression, or rally its allies. I can't agree more with that. In other words, that what we've been doing with respect to Mexico and Canada is criminal. We have no credibility with them, left anymore. We have burned that strategic asset. And we had considerable credibility with them, even coming out of the first Trump administration. And in this administration, he's burned all that in just a few months. And he can no longer make effective deals with them. But just today, he was really PO'd at what Canada did in raising some tariffs. Canada, of course, was only replying to the United States. But he was all surprised and disappointed. He's incredible. He can't predict the consequences of his actions. Very sad. Technology and the end of the lie. How the internet, artificial intelligence, and global technology make truth a superpower. In the 20th century, a lie could last for decades. Authoritarian regimes could control the flow of information. Governments could hide the atrocities they committed, deny invasions, or manipulate public opinion with few consequences. Even in democracies, intelligence could be distorted or classified, with journalists and whistleblowers struggling for years to uncover the facts. But in the 21st century, in the age of the internet, satellite, smartphones, and artificial intelligence, The cost of lying has exploded, and the power of truth has gone um, completely global. Today, it takes only minutes for a photo of truth movements to surface on social media, for a leaked memo to circulate online, or for AI-powered tools to detect disinformation campaigns. Every citizen is a potential witness. Every phone is a camera. Every data point can be verified, traced, cross-checked, and exposed. This transformation has massive implications for international strategy. Technology has shifted the game board, and strategies based on deception are becoming far less effective, or ineffective, especially in the long run. Lies are now easy to detect. What used to be hidden behind state secrets can now be seen from space, posted online, or decoded by open source researchers. Satellites provide real-time imaging of military buildups, environmental destruction, or covert infrastructure projects. Open source intelligence, OSINT communities, dissect flight data, shipping patterns, and even clothing and photographs to pinpoint truth. AI-driven tools detect fake videos, altered documents, and propaganda networks in real time. Excuse me. Fact checkers and journalists now have digital allies that make their work faster and more precise. Lies that might have once bought time now unravel, almost instantly. Truth travels faster than ever. Just as lies are more easily exposed, truth is more easily shared. Information no longer stops at borders. Cell phones, encrypted apps, and global platforms have made it possible for truth tellers to bypass censors and find audiences that are global. When live streams from war zones can be verified through geolocation tools, and whistleblowers can publish documents completely anonymously across the world, credible transparency earns global sympathy and support in real time. The age of digital communications has turned truth into a strategic advantage. Well, I think that's all true to a certain extent, but what we have to keep in mind is there are differences in the propaganda power that various agents have. If people with little power are telling the truth, but people with power to structure the information space can drown the spread of truth with messages that are much more intense and far more dense, then the truth can get lost in the wash of communications. That's occurring. I think that's what's gone on, in Israel. The Israeli government has had such a monopoly on the spread of information that people in Israel don't yet know about the devastating damage that's been caused by the 12-day war. They've been inside of their bunkers, and the state has been suppressing sharing what really happened during those 12 days and what continues to happen now because of the exchanges between the Israelis and Iran. So, going on, truth builds not just alliances, but movements. Truth no longer just shapes diplomacy, it shapes public opinion, economic flows, okay, and also, uh, you know, legitimacy. Countries that are seen as truthful can lead coalitions, attract investment, and earn respect. Their narratives win global audiences. Their voices rise above the noise. And in the digital age, that matters more than ever. Okay. The strategic implication. Truth has a technological edge. In game theory, the structure of the game determines the winning strategy. When everyone can see the board, bluffing loses its power. In today's hyper-connected world, transparency is the new terrain of power. A nation that lies in the digital age plays not just against other states, but against a global network of truth seekers, citizen analysts, journalists, and intelligent computers or machines. That network is getting faster, smarter, and more unforgiving. In our age of ever-increasing transparency, truth becomes the only viable long-term strategy. Truth is the ultimate winning strategy. Lying may look like an attractive shortcut, a way to win without paying the price, but in the long run, truth is not just the moral high ground. It is the strongest, smartest, and most sustainable strategy a nation can pursue. Why? Because credibility multiplies power. Because a nation that tells the truth and is known for it gains trust. Trust opens doors to alliances, investment, influence, and deterrence. It allows promises to serve as tools of persuasion and threats to work without firing a shot. Truthfulness gives a country leverage without force, because truth reduces uncertainty. In a world of shifting alliances and unpredictable crises, predictability is valuable. Allies want to know you'll stand by them. Rivals have to believe that when you draw a red line, you'll hold it. Truth makes signals clear, lies create confusion, and in geopolitics, confusion can lead to war. Because truth builds long-term relationships. Game theory teaches us that in repeated interactions which define global politics, cooperation thrives only when players can rely on each other. Truth is the currency of those relationships. Even successful lies accrue interest, and the cost must eventually be paid in lost deals, broken alliances, or armed conflicts. Because truth strengthens internal institutions. A country that builds foreign policy on truth fosters accountable transparency and rule of law at home. Deception abroad often comes from and leads to deception at home. Over time, a lying state corrodes not just foreign trust, but domestic integrity. Truthfulness reinforces uh, 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 legitimacy both inside and out. Because truth aligns with public values and democratic norms. In open societies where leaders answer to citizens, long-term trust is worth more than short-term trickery. Lies may mobilize support briefly, but they often breed disillusionment and backlash once uncovered. Truth fosters informed debate, civic engagement, and unity of the nation, because truth helps avoid dangerous escalation. Misunderstandings between nuclear powers or even regional rivals are most often born of misinformation. When states lie about their intentions, they increase the risk of miscalculation. Truth reduces that risk and provides a foundation for crisis stability. And finally, because the most enduring power is not built on fear, but on trust. A country whose word is trusted becomes a magnet for others. It doesn't need to dominate. It leads. Its agreements last. Its influence spreads not through force but through trust and confidence. Lies can win certain moments. Truth wins centuries. In global affairs, it is not the loudest nor the most deceptive nation who wins in the long term. It is the one whose commitments bind, whose alliances endure, and whose words can be trusted. In the long term, truth is the only winning strategy. Well, this article, to the extent that it tells us the truth, is bad news for Donald Trump. I already took him.
Did you?
Yeah. In this, going on with the article, in this haunting allegory by Francisco Goya, the great Spanish master of shadow and revelation, time emerges as a winged, weathered figure, lifting the naked form of truth from the obscuring gloom, while history, calm and composed, records the moment with her quill. Painted amid war, tyranny, and disillusionment, the word speaks without words. Though truth may be silenced, hidden, or wounded, she is never lost. Time, slow but sure, brings her upward. History bears witness in the hush between darkness and light. Goya reminds us that truth is eternal, fragile in the moment, but triumphant in the end. Again, it is too bad that our president doesn't see this and will not bear witness to truth. What this article means is that his continued reign over this country is sure to end in destruction, and sadness, because he rarely tells the truth. He always exaggerates. He always breaks faith with other parties who have to cooperate with him. So eventually he loses all his allies, and it is tougher and tougher for him to gain some new ones, because as time passes, fewer and fewer people will trust him. So I thought that article was important to put forward, especially in the context of the deceptions that have governed the interactions of Iran and Israel, and the United States, and the actions of the collective West with the BRICS nations. As well. There was one more thing I wanted to cover for tonight, but it is getting late. That is the article on the AI stack, the Huawei AI stack. That's an important article to cover. And at this point, what I'll do is postpone it until Tuesday, and I will cover it in my stream coming up, on Tuesday. I am getting closer to getting ready to go for Tuesday, because there are just a lot of things increasingly to talk about. But I think this is a good stopping place for tonight. I hope you all enjoyed the show. I'm glad that so many of you were here. I'm glad that you were here as well, Dee.
Yes, I was happy to be here too. Every week, there's just so much going on.
So much to talk about.
Right, and so this is good Saturday just to go over everything.
So many important things to say. I thought that Alexander's analysis of what was going on, of why the Iranians presented themselves as enriching to 61%, that was the most coherent explanation I'd seen for that. And it strikes me as true because in my political experiences, so often compromises have emerged from conflicting sources that just don't make any sense from a practical point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And this was just another case of that.
And something too is with Trump and Israel wanting to take out the supreme leader, it's just so ridiculous because he's been the one that has been the stop. There are so many that are not as religious as he is, and they would be right on to develop a nuclear weapon.
Yes, I know. To go after the supreme leader makes no sense if you don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon.
Exactly.
I mean, it literally makes no sense.
It doesn't. He's been the stop to it. And now what has been done?
Nuclear weapon in 2003, if not for him.
Exactly. And
it's really amazing.
It is. And the actions of Israel now has the country. Everybody's so together. Where the CIA and everybody else was looking to try to divide the country. Well, the country is united more now, and everybody's come together and they want to be nuclear armed. They realize they need to be protected.
Yeah, I think popular opinion inside of Iran now is overwhelmingly in favor of their getting some nuclear bombs.
Yes, because they realize that is what they need to safeguard themselves, and the fact that other countries like North Korea, for example, as soon as they got the nukes, boom, all of a sudden the U.S. is not, should say, up their ass all the time.
But it was not simply their nukes. It's also because they tested the missile technology to deliver the nukes.
Mm.
Okay, I think Iran doesn't yet have intercontinental ballistic missiles. Okay, but I have to believe that it's not such a big deal for them to get those because their intermediate range stuff is so good. The reason why they don't have the ICBMs is because they never contemplated actual war with the United States, except a kind of limited war, in their area.
Mm-hmm.
But until recently, I don't think they ever contemplated, possibly attacking the United States, on our home ground. But I'm sure this attack on them, has awakened a desire in many Iranians to hit back in kind and to find a way to attack the United States on its home ground, at least to be able to threaten the United States,
Mm-hmm.
our home ground. And I think they have the scientific capability to design the ICBMs and warheads, that might be needed for that. So, I mean, I think we've been taking exactly the wrong approach, to Iran. We should have settled for the JCPOA.
Mm-hmm.
That was very favorable to us. And they were complying with it. And they were even happy with it.
Well, there was speculation that the Mossad was planning some type of action in the U.S., kind of like some kind of attack, and claiming it was Iran.
Yes.
So it was those kind of games being played, and
Okay, I wonder what the attack on Mossad headquarters, what the impact of that's going to be on the future of Mossad, because they've just lost so much, so many people. We don't even know how many high-level people, but how many up-and-coming people they've lost. But I think if they lost 3,000 people, it's likely to put a very large crimp into their operations. I mean, because they're all over the world in many different countries. If they lost 3,000 people, they're going to have to pull back.
yeah, and they've also lost many operatives in Iran, and Iran's really, really, going after.
And they probably are losing operatives in Iraq too.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm sure the Iraqis want to begin to clamp down on them so as to avoid the possibility of an Iranian, of retaliation, on Iraq. And then probably the resistance by the Shias in Iraq is also probably focused on finding the Mossad operatives and clearing them out. So I think these are tough times for Mossad.
Definitely.
I think
And
run into
yeah.
And tough times for the IDF also. In other words, if the main building of the Ministry of Defense was destroyed, as it seems to have been, I mean, that's got to be very telling for the effectiveness of the Defense Department. And similarly for the Foreign Ministry. And similarly for Mossad. I mean, those losses have to be really serious. So in the coming weeks, I'm sure we're going to hear about these effects, and a different impression of the capabilities of the Israelis is going to emerge. Also, we don't know yet, the impact of the war on their industry. I mean, it's just from a list of targets that were hit and were seriously hit. It's obvious that that impact is going to be very, very serious. The question is, will they be able to recover as a societal whole from the damage, the physical damage that has been done to the infrastructure and the personnel damage that has been done to the military people who have been lost? I think they were probably among the best and the brightest Israelis from the standpoint of technical capability.
Yeah. I mean, it's real. It's like the world came crashing down.
I think it has. And we haven't begun yet to see the impacts of that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I think these are subjects for another day.
Yes.
I think we've come to the end for tonight. Okay, tomorrow is a birthday celebration for Bonnie.
Happy birthday, Bonnie.
Thank you. So we are going out
Oh, very nice.
and we're going to have a really great time.
Oh, that's good. Should be a lot of fun.
It will be. Believe me, it's going to be great.
That's good.
Okay, so I'll see you soon. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Yes. Good night, everybody, and good night, Bonnie.
Good night. Okay, it was
Have fun tomorrow.
as always. Thank you. Okay, good night, everybody, and thank you all for coming.
Yes. Good night.